what are some of your other like personal guiding ethics?
Oh God. I mean, if we go back to axiomatic values, I don't know how well I could run those through because I feel like nobody can concretely define their own axioms. They can just kind of gesture at a space where they exist. With in
Gesture for me.
gesture, well, I mean, obviously I want people to be happy. I want everyone to be happy, regardless of how much I agree with or disagree with them. The ideal world is in which everyone is happy, hopefully. Um,
Can I ask you why before you go on? Why do you want everyone to be happy?
I guess well-being would be a better word to use than happy. But I think I have kind of an epistemic bias towards consciousness as a value. And if consciousness is a just sort of an evolved decision-making apparatus, and well-being or happiness are the ways in which we're neurotically rewarded for doing things well. I guess my universe is anchored towards that. Like that to me is the good. Like the process by which we make decisions that benefit ourselves and others is the center axle of the clock of the universe. And everything around that, just kind of has to be built outwards. And that's a
Right.
totally arbitrary preference on my part, of course. I could never justify that beyond metaphysical.
I
Yeah,
mean, that's the point of metaphysics is like fundamentally all these like core, this is why you can't describe them well, as you said, there's like most of our like core essential like values break down to more or less like somewhat circular logic or kind of like fifis basically. Like,
exactly.
well, I
Exactly.
feel like it would be good if everyone could be happy, right? Which is simple, but true.
Past a point, there's only so much you can do. Nobody's solved
Mhm.
philosophy, thankfully. And I think most people are kind of in that ballpark as well, as in they have a fundamental bias towards human well-being. They don't
Mhm.
always define well-being in human the way I do, but I think that's just a recurring fact of human nature, is that we seem, by being social animals, we seem to gesture in that direction. And I think that politics is just a system by which we try to maximize that, if any, values. Um,
Right.
so on
Happiness, well-being of all people,
much
right?
as you could hope, yeah. I guess beyond the basic don't essentialize, I have a very strong bias towards like freedom as a concept or self-determination, which I'm very fond of. It has to be. It's not a perfect belief, of course. I don't believe in lawlessness, for example. But stuff like that. I think if you work within a couple of very basic tenets, you can build out a pretty functional ethical and political system.
Yep. So freedom, self-determination. How do you feel about, because a lot of people will also say things like truth or justice. Do you care about any of these like kind of like lofty, again, circular ethical values, or what are your feelings about things like that?
Yeah, well, I think that justice must necessarily be a subset of the well-being, and truth must necessarily be a subset of the freedom. I don't know how any group of people could consider themselves free if they don't know what's going on around them, right? The more truthful the information they're exposed to, the better they have the ability to make decisions. If, all the information they're exposed to is completely controlled or inaccurate, they're not really free. The decisions that they have the ability to make are being chosen for them by the people with the info. So yeah, I,
Mm.
I would have strong biases towards those things as well.
Interesting. And see, this is the thing that I get caught up on with optics a lot of the time is that optics sometimes feel like you're playing wiggle. You're wiggling around a little bit with the truth where you're like making, sometimes you wiggle it just a little bit where you make the truth just the most palatable towards somebody. But sometimes you also will abandon some element of truth to make a concept more palatable to pull them in, right? This would be like the aren't onion argument of essentially you make the outside layer of this ideology the most palatable, but maybe also not the fully true version of where we're going to get to the center of the onion. That's like the very, very intense dogmatic view of this worldview. Um, which is difficult to navigate.
Oh, 100%. And there's no solution either. There's no way to communicate any ethical or political value in which everything is delivered in the most straightforward fashion possible, because there is no most straightforward fashion. There are always ways of presenting information, and that is always going to prioritize certain types of info over others. And you might not even be aware of the biases you're laying into it. Nobody is an
Mhm.
unbiased actor. I think you should make an effort to be as forthcoming and truthful as possible. After all, if you have to like explicitly lie to promote an ideology that cannot possibly be, you know, a strong ideology. But even then, there are exceptions, right? So, like, for example, if say Nazi Germany, right? With the Jews, the Holocaust, it's ramping up, ethically, I think you could say any shit to like a German to get them to not send a Jew to the death camp, right? I'm not a
Right.
Kantian by any sense, right? If you're like, actually Jews when killed explode with poisonous gas, they kill the whole neighborhood, you don't want to shoot them, please trust me. Like whatever, save as many
Hmm.
people as you can. And I think you can appeal to like a higher order ethical value there. Like, so okay, so obviously you're not being dishonest for dishonesty's sake. Like the higher value there is preserving life. But it's a constant balance, and I don't think there's a way of like solving that conflict.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because one thing that makes me think of is like at an interpersonal level, there might be some times to make the most moral decision, you then have to obfuscate truth, right? In the case of like lying about the outcomes of like shooting somebody who's Jewish and saying that it's going to poison your neighborhood.
Yeah, it's
The
just
problem is
some
that
very realistic example there, of course.
yeah, yeah. But at a societal level, I feel like this is where I get stuck because it's like, well, if you have societal level ideas, I really don't want those ideas. Like, there's nothing more, for example, in my view, that I've experienced, distasteful than trying to argue with somebody about societal level issues, topics, and ideas. And the reality, like the landscapes that each of you are arguing from, appear different. And it means possibly both of you are lying or self deluded, or one of you is for sure lying. Because if I say right, this is a plant, and then my opponent says, "What do you mean? It's not a plant," right? And they term it something else. Now we can't even go forward with any further idea or battlement, right? So it's like at an interpersonal level, there's some element where like full on obfuscation of the truth might be valuable, but at a societal level, especially when it's like these ideas are building the landscape of like how you psychologically engage with the world, how much truth or untruth can be within there before you create, this is what I wonder about with the divisiveness in America. Is like in many ways when you listen to like very left people or very right people argue, they exist within a landscape that often doesn't seem to exist to anybody else.
No, yeah, for sure. One of the best and easiest to cite examples of like dishonesty on a social level that's justifiable relates to matters of national security. Like in World War II, for example, every government was lying to its own people about a lot of shit, but like you kind of have to. You don't want to lose the war, right? The citizens do not want you to lose the war. It's kind of like an expected, we'll support our government and we'll also accept you not letting us know the exact troop positions at all times. That seems like a fair trade-off. A good
Mhm.
example of kind of like a bit of obfuscation that I might think is justifiable is this. Immigration to the United States does not lower native wages. Asterisk. And the asterisk is that it lowers native wages for only one group, which is to say, high school dropouts in the United States, like poor high school dropouts, get like a very minor wage decrease for a short period of time, but eventually it goes back up due to the extra economic activity of the immigrants, right? If you said broadly, immigration does not lower native wages, you would be like 99.9% correct. That would be like I think, a very responsible statement to make. But it should have, in my opinion, the asterisk. I think it's one of those situations where you should lead with the strong argument, but promote awareness of the caveat, right? Because every
Mhm.
policy comes with a caveat. Nothing is for free. Every road built, every power plant constructed, every dam, there's always something that's going to be lost, something somewhere that's going to be neglected more so than before as a product of the money being moved around. And while you shouldn't like have to dedicate 40 minutes of your argument to addressing all that, because if that was the case,
Mhm.
nothing would ever get done, it should be
Yep.
accessible. And you should say, if you want more info, look here. I think that's
And
a
you
good
shouldn't
way of
deny
going
it.
by. Yeah, no, you shouldn't lie. You shouldn't lie about it. You just don't have to lead with it. Because again, like if we all handled stuff that way, how would we ever get anything done on like a social level? It'd be impossible.
Right. I'd be curious because it's good to have these like lofty personal ethics, and it's also annoying to have them because it means that we're inevitably going to fail them at certain times, right? There's going to be times, for example, that you say never essentialize, and then you do in an argument or in a topic. Especially, it seems to be the case. The more like emotional and upset we feel about something, the easier it is to kind of fail on some of these like core ethics because a lot of these things like never essentialize sometimes requires us to like take a step back from the actual topic, which is harder to do if the topic is very personally relevant to you as well. When you've noticed, for example, that you've failed on one of your own like personal ethics, what is your typical like course correction or like, yeah, what's your typical course correction process?
Well, it's very difficult to reflect on stuff like that in a live stream environment because of the nature of the medium. If you're arguing
Yeah.
with a bunch of people in your chat, it's figuring out anything in that context is difficult. I think I was doing this as a joke, but, you know, edgy boy I am. I was making some racist comments about Serbs in a debate that I had recently, about, like, being naturally evil or something like that, which I didn't believe. It was irony. But it was also maybe a bit over the line, because obviously, you know, being ironically racist doesn't mean you're not being racist, of course. So that was probably a bit over the line. I got an email from somebody complaining, and I think a Twitter DM. So that I'll probably try to back off of. Generally speaking, I think it just takes a little bit of reflection. I don't think the audience understands always that they're not necessarily being helpful by constantly trying to sort of, oh, he fucked up when he said this or did this. In large part because if you're a large enough streamer, you're going to hear that all the time about everything that you do. You know,
Yes.
so it's very difficult to in the moment go like, oh, well, this one actually did have a good point, you know, because past a point you can't even read all of it. But I think there are a lot of streamers, I think, who are more prideful than myself. For example, Hassan is allergic to acknowledging that he was wrong on something. I think it might actually kill him. I worry about this. But I think there's a kind of dignity in being able to acknowledge something like this. If you can
Right.
own up to a mistake in a way, you can kind of like lead by example with this, you know, so committed am I to my beliefs that I am willing to admit I did wrong. And if you do it well enough, it makes you look good to admit that you were actually bad.